Welcome to the third and final conversations with this week. Delighted you can join us. The format is the same we use every year, and we'll have an opportunity to talk to our guest and then open it up for questions. We've got roving mics, so when I kind of give you the sign, if you could just raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. I'll try to move back and forth through the room on this. Today's guest is truly somebody that really doesn't need introduction. One, because you've seen his background and his bio throughout the week as one of our conversations with guests. And second, of course, everyone is aware of Julian Assange. So I want to welcome Julian to the IBA. If they switch, see if we can, there he is. Julian, thank you for joining us, and I want to thank you personally because I know it's quite early in the morning, I think probably around 3:15 in the morning, so we appreciate that.
3:15 a.m.
Absolutely. And I asked Julian before I got on here whether he was able to get some sleep or he just kind of worked through it. He said he's worked through, he's had a busy evening. So again, thank you for being here with us today. Let me start, if I could, with a more general question about WikiLeaks and your approach to the issue of kind of good versus harm, and whether or not you think that there is a balance as to what is presented to the public through WikiLeaks. Obviously, one of the highlights came from the records that were released from Private Chelsea Manning. This showed, not only from your work, but Mr. Snowden's work, kind of a massive government surveillance operation, torture, death of civilians in the hands of international forces in Iraq, in Afghanistan. So I think many viewed that as simply being a whistleblower to information that was, I think, certainly a surprise and probably offensive to many. But on the other side, you have, through WikiLeaks, published millions of documents that deals with hacked emails of corporations, public figures, international trade agreements, and they have at times damaged kind of individual privacy and some would argue without kind of public benefit. How do you go about, or do you at all go about, in making some distinction between what you think is something that needs to be known and others that might be harmful or might not just simply be crucial or important?
Wow, sorry. What a total. In some ways it's a great question, in other ways it's not at all. Civilization is formed as a result of human beings communicating what they know, ideas, and collective.
Julian, we're having, I apologize for interrupting because you're kind of going in and out, which is unfortunate in the technology issue. So
I think it's echoing.
Okay, go ahead.
So let me check. Am I cutting out?
You're cutting out a bit, in and out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's probably some echo suppression. There's too much of what I am saying coming back in your mic to me. Okay. That would be my guess.
That sounds better. Go ahead, try again.
Okay, so every law, every constitution, every regulation is formed as a result of human beings communicating what they know. That is a process that exists above and beyond the law because it is the process which forms the very bedrock from which laws are made, regulated, and so on. So then the question becomes, what does WikiLeaks decide to spend its energies on? And, well, we have a taxi rank principle. If someone comes to us with information that it hasn't been in the public before, it is of diplomatic, political, ethical, or historical significance, it's significant information. And it's under some kind of suppression, or the person themselves is under some kind of threat, you know, they can't publish it themselves, then we will publish it. We might occasionally redact some information for some limited period of time if there's an arguable case that it could lead to fairly direct forms of retribution against individuals that don't go through a formal justice process. So someone having some, you know, assassinating someone as an example, as opposed to revealing information that does lead to retribution, but it is through a fair judicial process.
What is if you look back at trying to, and I sense that, well, really that balance, other than if it has a direct harm on somebody, you generally then objectively put the information in consequences or consequences. And again, getting back to the initial leaks where people found out about this government massive surveillance, I think many people felt, yeah, that's something I didn't know and I wanted to know. And I'm glad you presented that. Obviously, there are many that would disagree with that. But if you turn to a situation, and one example is the one that came out this past year on the presidential elections. So WikiLeaks had made a decision to publish thousands of emails just before the election in the U.S. And I suspect that in doing so, there had to be some recognition that this was going to have an impact. Consequences were going to occur. We've read where Hillary Clinton has said, well, actually, the WikiLeaks documents contributed significantly to her defeat. Donald Trump's tweeted, "I love WikiLeaks." So was there any assessment on what those consequences would be in putting those emails, leaked emails, out at that particular moment? It looks to some as just an agenda, that maybe you disliked Hillary, you wanted to move in a different direction. How do you respond to that kind of review and decision making?
It's quite, I mean, there's an interesting issue about why this topic comes up at all, which perhaps we can get on to later. No, it's WikiLeaks as an organization which is committed to be the most aggressive publisher in the world, the strongest defender of press freedoms, that has never been accused of censoring one of its sources, and has obeyed scrupulously its reputation for accuracy and boldness in publishing, and having never unpublished something. Yeah, we're not in the business of censoring information. But if we get information about an election, before an election, we will do everything possible to publish it at the moment where the public are most interested in it, which is before an election rather than after. And it would be a betrayal of our role before the public to, you know, suppress information to the benefit of one candidate or another.
But you recognize then that there were consequences that in this particular election, do you see that in fact WikiLeaks
not really, because we looked at the polling like everyone else did, and the that essentially the whole establishment of the United States, with the exception of Fox News, perhaps, was united behind Hillary Clinton. So those factors led us to the conclusion that Hillary Clinton would win, and our publications wouldn't make a significant difference. They could well discolour her as she was forming her administration, and of course she would be likely to take this significant extra revenge on us as an organisation for publishing that material in the election campaign. So from where my position and the position of our staff is that actually this was a rigorous commitment to principle, and that we were entering into a position of danger and significant self-sacrifice by infuriating the person who the opinion polls were saying had a 90 to 98% chance of becoming president.
Continuing on that line, because it still is debated right now. It's being debated in Washington. But
I mean, even if we had known that that Trump would be elected as he in the end was, I mean, wouldn't have changed that at all. I mean, if you have principles, you have to live by them.
But if you
otherwise, they're not principles. You can't decide you're not going to have a principle just because the situation mildly changes. I disagree with the analysis of the hysteria about the U.S. president and, frankly, the power of presidents in general.
Getting back to that point, though, in the sense of the perception that there might be an agenda, it was known that you didn't have a real like of Hillary Clinton. I think that was common knowledge. You had your issues when she was...
I think that was common to about 50% of the American population.
Okay. Well, well, at the time...
And I think that probably the majority of the rest of the world's population, actually.
Right.
At the time...
I mean, I don't know the woman. I don't have, I'm not one of the... I'm not in high school. I don't have dislikes of people that I haven't met. It's a more kind of, I don't like their policies or their, the way that they might lead towards, for example.
On those leaks, in the sense you had mentioned earlier about kind of an objective process of getting sourced information, if it met kind of the criteria that WikiLeaks has set out, then you publish it, you put it out on this. So I want to ask you, still on the presidential election leaks, in the sense of that source material. On the leaks that happened on the Democratic National Committee, at least now in the United States, there's a fairly consistent position from the National Security Agency, the FBI, the CIA, that information that was leaked was actually sourced by Russia military intelligence. And they are adamant that that's where that information came from. I've read where you have said, well, that's not the case. But is it possible that if first of all, I'll just ask you directly, how do you know that it was not from Russian military intelligence when it seems that everybody that's looking at this right now suggests that it was? And is there a sense that WikiLeaks could be an unwilling or willing agent of a government, in this case, Russia?
I mean, you're sort of suggesting, I don't know, that a public service like the postal system might be an unwitting or willing agent of all sorts of people transmitting the post. It doesn't mean you close down the postal service. But in relation to our sourcing, on this particular issue, our source is not a member of any state or those various publications related to the election. Now, there has been an intentional conflation between a variety of other publications and other leaks that appeared in the US press with material that were published. But the formal position of US intelligence, as stated by President Barack Obama and the head of the ODNI, etc., is that their formal position is that they believe that with high confidence, the other with slightly less, that Russian actors hacked the DNC. I don't know that they speak about our Podesta publication, and that through some circuitous chain of intermediaries, that information was given to us. That's what they claim.
The interview that you gave in the New Yorker, which I suspect a number of people have read anyway, said that, and I'd like your thoughts on this, because obviously you've indicated now with U.S. intelligence that they're kind of saying what they want to say. He says this, quote, "Whatever one thinks of Assange's election disclosures, accepting his contention that they shared no ties with two Russian fronts requires willful blindness," unquote. So do you think that this will continue to be the general perception of that particular leak? We have now Bob Mueller, who's investigating, undoubtedly will be looking at this as well. Are you confident that this will not lead to a scenario where the evidence is overwhelming that in fact those leaked emails came from Russian military sources?
Of the emails that we published, I'm confident that our sources will never be shown to be that. Yeah. I mean, look, enormous energy has been put into the alleged Russiagate investigation in the United States. Enormous energy, vast resources across the FBI, CIA, NSA, the Democratic Party, the democratically aligned press, which has the best investigative capacity, with extremely little to show for it.
Although they are saying
over the course of a year. So that's, I'm speaking more broadly now about the attempts to tie the Trump campaign team to Russia in some way. I mean, I don't know. Maybe the campaign has, in other respects, relationship with the Russian government. I don't know. Just looking at the look, it's a little bit like the situation with weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So before that, before the war and before they were discovered that there were none, my analysis was that vast resources were being put into trying to find any at all, or any evidence, and to amplify whatever could look like something. Huge resources. And that there hadn't been anything of substance. And that therefore, my view was that perhaps Iraq had some chemical weapons, but these were not of strategic significance, clearly. Otherwise, these vast resources would have turned up something. And so this would be my guess about the Trump administration's contacts with Russia. That maybe there's something there, but if so, it's not of significance. Because if it was of significance, the vast resources that were put into it and the whole year of time would have turned up more than they have.
But if that may very well be the case, but what I'm suggesting is that there seems to be consistency now emerging, at least in the United States, from all of these agencies, that there's little doubt that those emails and the hacking of the the Democratic National Committee was in fact done through Russia military intelligence. And if that is the case, then the question...
Where are the leaks? There's like Washington's leaking like a sieve these days, which I'm proud of having contributed to that dynamic. Where are the leaks on that? We see leaks on everything else. We don't see any leaks on that. And we hear statements such as those from James Clapper, the head of the DNI, that there's, as far as when WikiLeaks got our materials, sequencing, they don't know. So, I mean, they don't even know about our communications with our sources, when they happened and so on. So I think what's occurring, I think that the way that they're constructing this is that if you go back and you look last year, you'll see that prior to the Russian hysteria, the US government came out and said that that 5 or 6 different states or organizations had been involved in hacking the BNC, RNC, and so on over a number of years. And that's absolutely what you expect. I mean, we published proof showing that the CIA was tasked to hack the French elections, the one before Macron, and in a very invasive way. So that's absolutely normal. Every major political party of a major country has hackers from a variety of countries, and private organizations contracted them by them in there. So I think you've got, on the one hand, perhaps some forensic trail showing one state or another state in these organizations. And then on the other hand, you have WikiLeaks publishing things. And what I don't think there exists is a proper connection between these two. It's an inferment, an intelligence inferment by the ODNI.
All right, but hypothetically, if you had a sense, an awareness that the information that was being passed to WikiLeaks was coming from not an individual hacker, but it was coming from the military intelligence of a government that clearly had its objective to sway the US elections, which seems to be a fairly objective position right now from all sources. If you knew that, would you still publish it? Or would you say, well, no, I'm not going to play that. I'm not going to become an agent to the influence of this party or this government, state, in trying to interfere with the elections of another country?
Yeah, I don't know. We haven't been in that position. It's an interesting hypothetical question. I thought about it in a different way, which is, what if a large state, say China, what if we perceived that a large state, say China, gave us information to publish about Taiwan, much smaller state? Will we have a problem with that? Maybe. Maybe. We don't have a rule for that. We have to think about it. We have to think about what that rule is. But it's not like if we don't publish something, it disappears, you know. When we publish it, it gets properly assessed and analyzed and so on. If we don't publish it, it will appear somewhere else. So it's not like we're actually contributing to a problem. Actually, we're contributing to understanding what the information actually is in such a case.
So some room there on this. You've talked about a bit earlier about journalism, but you've been pretty critical of that. You said in the New Yorker interview, quote, "We come not to save journalism, but to destroy it." Quote, "Journalism doesn't deserve to live. It has to be grounded down into the ashes before a new structure can be formed." So I'm curious about that, because you do rely on journalists. WikiLeaks has part of its staff and its whole process, journalists who are involved with it. So is this mainstream media that you're criticizing? It seems the journalistic integrity...
Yeah, I think you'll see somewhere in that quote I say something that there's a fundamental information asymmetry between the journalist and the reader. And this information asymmetry is exploited. If the reader wasn't ignorant, they wouldn't read to gain knowledge. Do you see? Therefore, because the reader is by definition ignorant, otherwise they have no interest in reading, this then causes a knowledge gap which can be exploited and which is exploited all the time. Yeah, I'm very familiar with that. I would say that something like in the Western, in the big Western countries, something like 2% of journalists are credible, in my view, in terms of accuracy. I mean, that very article is an example of that. That quote is presented as if I said it in an interview to this journalist. I didn't. I said it in 2010, a long, long time ago, but constructed to, I guess, further a particular democratic narrative. The editor of the New Yorker, David Remnick, close friend of Hillary Clinton, and so on. So, yeah, these constructions occur. I'm sure everyone in the audience who's found themselves a case that they've been involved in, reported in the press, will understand exactly what I mean. There's a quite interesting syndrome, which is you're involved in something, you see it reported in the press, and you go, it's nothing like that. Now, I know that from personal experience. It's largely fabricated, sometimes completely fabricated quotes, otherwise chronologies reversed for some particular reason, etc. But what people then don't do, and I even catch myself falling to this, is that we then look at a story that we don't have direct knowledge of its truthfulness because we're not direct participants, or something about foreign affairs, etc. And we assume it's accurate. No, that dog food is made exactly the same way as the, I'm mixing my metaphors now, but that dog food is made exactly the same way as the stuff that you saw and understood how bad the process was.
This past, this year...
I would actually say that, look, I believe in education, and WikiLeaks and important public records are adult education. It creates a defining environment of what we can, in some sense, agree to be true. And obviously we all have different angles on a particular archive or public document. But at least we can agree it is a public document. It's true, and WikiLeaks has a pristine record over 11 years of publishing only information that is accurately described. It's remarkable. Yeah, so I believe that our civilization can only be as strong. Together as human beings, we can only rise to the height with which the knowledge scaffold that we have can reach. And if this scaffold is actually made out of plasticine or supports that seem strong but actually create a fiction, then you can't reach very high. And I think we see that all the time. The corrosive effects of selective news reporting, complete fabrications, hype, hysteria. Yeah, I think the press is in general a very toxic instrument and extremely corrosive And when it does its job right, and it does do its job right sometimes as a result of, a few good journalists, then it's a remarkable thing.
Well,
the gap between its potential achievements and its actual record is so immense. You really have to question whether the world would be better off without it. Perhaps even a reversal of this.
I mean, that's a fairly strong indictment on, mainstream media, when I think mainstream media, whether it's...
I don't think the alternative media is any better. In fact, it's frequently worse.
But WikiLeaks has the right...
False.
Right. Let me, you had just referred to a platform, and we're with, of course, an international audience of lawyers, and so law plays an important platform for the IBA and for lawyers in general. We know that this past year Sweden dropped the arrest warrant that had been part of a European arrest warrant that came out in 2010. They've dropped that arrest warrant, but during this time you were very critical of Sweden, suggesting that it had a poor judicial system. I think many people thought that was a bit harsh against Sweden. So 2 points. One, fundamentally, your failure or your desire not to engage with the issues of that arrest warrant on the attempted rape, the allegation of that, was that done primarily because of your concern for extradition, or did you just have a complete lack of faith in the judicial legal system to provide you a fair hearing and a fair process on that issue?
No, Sweden would not guarantee that I would not be onwards extradited to the United States. And I had a complete lack of faith in Sweden's ability, of its judicial system's ability, and I guess more broadly as a political society, its ability to fairly carry out a hearing in relation to a US extradition. Because there's obviously various hooks that one could use in Swedish law, or pull downs from European law to try and resist onwards extradition to the United States. And my experience in Sweden and how it was dealing with the other case, not even case, preliminary investigation. I was never even charged. That made me very concerned about its resilience as a judicial system. I mean, it's my philosophical takeaway from that experience and others is every state has a level at which its judicial system breaks down, where the political nature of a case or the opponents of the accused they have a level where they break down. Every country has it. There's no exemption. Every international tribunal, it's the same everywhere. And the only question really is, where is this level, and where are you as a defendant on that level?
I think
in my case, I was on this level, and Sweden's capacities were on this level.
I mean, I guess that's the point of saying, well, certainly there are countries in the world that one would question the integrity, the ability of the judicial system.
There's no exception. There's no exception. And let me give you a type of proof. A military invasion will remove every judicial system. No exception. So you actually see that the administration of the law, judges, all that, it comes as a result of the military domination of a particular area of land, and to more efficaciously administer that military domination and more efficiently, and to gain to have less opposition from the population that are there. There's a construction of various lightly armed forms of the military, we call them police, and delegated decision-making, so you don't have to have your top power figures constantly making decisions, and instead you create standardized rules and people to administer them. So whenever things start getting up near this level of the fundamental underpinnings of where legal systems emerge from, they break down. No exception.
But if you're saying there's no exceptions, and pointing Sweden as an example of a country that, again, as you suggested, had a weak judicial system, then you are in essence saying, well,
I don't think it's fair to say that it has a weak judicial system, given the size of its population, its geographical position, its history, etc. Rather that, as I said, every country's judicial system breaks down at some point. Sweden being a small country, isolated geographically from its big friends, scared of Russia and that culture. I mean, I become a bit of a Sweden nerd, I can describe the history of Sweden going back to the 15th century and the emergence of the judicial system. But, yeah, it's basically what you would expect of a country about that size that is deeply integrated in the US armaments logistical supply chain, and also the United Kingdom, where its most powerful, influential companies and families are part of that, the Bollenberg family and so on. So it's just an inevitable thing with a country that size. I mean, it's like New Zealand, for example, when the Rainbow Warrior was blown up by DGSE secret agents from France in the harbour. And a man was killed. Very serious crime. But those people left. Two of them were found, convicted, tried, and smuggled out of New Zealand. With the approval of the New Zealand government within a few years, and did not serve their full sentence. But there's an example with the power of the French state, and it's only the French state.
But I think the consequences of that, and I'm going to ask now people to get prepared to ask Julian some questions. The only concern there would be the consequences that if one is saying, in essence, well, all legal systems have trouble and they break down, as you say, and therefore, as an individual, I'm not going to place myself within the context of that particular legal system, then the perception could be, well, you've avoided a legal process, and what does that mean for the rule of law generally if everyone can kind of make that determination?
No, I think absolutely not. Absolutely not. Sweden avoided the legal process and engaged in an illegal process. As the finding of the United Nations. The UK appealed that finding and lost again. So Sweden was formally condemned by the United Nations. It was a formal litigation before the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention.
This is the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. On that.
They would not follow process of even asking me the first question. They refused to even ask me the first question in that entire process. I was never charged. I had already been found to be innocent by the chief prosecutor of Stockholm. A completely corrupt process. Absolutely corrupt.
All right. Let me.
And yes, did I then say no? You have to do things reasonably. The behaviour which you've engaged in gives me no faith in relation to onwards US extradition. And they had also rendered people to the CIA, previous refugees and so on. It gives me no faith. Therefore, pick up the phone if you want to speak to me. Do what is normal in Europe. Send someone here to ask me the first question if you want to resurrect what investigation where I had already been found to be innocent.
Well, that process...
We had to litigate for years to get them to even ask me the first question.
that process has now kind of moved on, and so one of the questions I'll ask at the end is kind of
It has moved on. We won. We won, and now we're suing for damages.
What I'm saying is that others would, I think, say, well, you may have won that and may have deservingly won that, but there's still a question about whether the principle, the legality principle, was that weakened in the process, because it's unlikely that somebody else would have been able to avoid it.
Sweden was not following its own laws. It was not following European laws. It was not following international law.
Okay. Let me open it up for questions. We've got some mics around, and so I'm going to go. Hold on one second. Right over here first on this side. And what I'm going to do is to ask you just a question, short question, and I'll ask Julian to respond, Mr. Assange to respond in the same. Short question.
Yes, thank you, Julian. I'm a fan of yours. I admire the work you do. The quick question is, well, firstly, perhaps I should say I'm a barrister from South Africa in Johannesburg. I dabble a bit in libel law and defamation law. The courts around, certainly the Commonwealth countries, including South Africa, which used to be a Commonwealth country, make a distinction between information that is of interest to the public, on the one hand, and information that is interesting to the public on the other. What I'd like to learn from you is what processes or what measures do you follow to ensure or to distinguish between the two types of information?
Very good questions. I wrote the UN submission about exactly this point to the UN.
Sorry, I have a related question.
No, just one question. Let Mr. Assange do it.
Have a look at Assange. If you search for Assange, WikiLeaks, Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, or protection sources. So my view is that is the wrong way to look at it. That actually there is a well-established tradition, and it's about newsworthiness when we're talking about publication. And newsworthiness is pretty much of interest to the public, not of public interest. And this view about one is essentially a fundamentally anti-democratic viewpoint of interest to the public. Well, who decides that? Of public interest, the public decides with their eyeballs. They essentially vote, if you like, for the information that they believe is important to them. So this is the way that WikiLeaks operates. We're interested in material that is newsworthy in the kind of fast news sense, but also over the long period of time. It's archive worthy. And that can also include information that's completely unnewsworthy in isolation, but it adds to the rich context of something that has been published. Or it keeps us honest in the sense that we try to publish full archives. As I said, occasionally there may need to be redaction for a limited period of time. But we try to publish full archives. So, because otherwise there's a selection criteria, and this selection criteria inevitably psychological, cultural biases and fears about reputational management and so on would enter into that selection process. And in many cases it would be economically impossible because we publish at such high volume.
On this side, who's got a question? Here, right here.
Julian Norrington from the Australian newspaper. You seem to have had strained relations with the Australian government and your diplomatic representation from Australia in recent years. Could you say...
I wasn't aware there was any representation, but okay.
Fair enough. As far as I know, there was, so the government claimed some contact with you at some point, and I'm not...
Yeah, every so often they call up saying, would you like consular support? and we say, what are you offering? And then they don't say anything. And that's their contact.
Okay, that's fine. And I'm not trying to dispute, your version of events. I just wanted to ask you...
In fact, Bob Carr, in his autobiography, in fact admitted that he had lied when he said that I had had more consular support than any other Australian in that year or something. He admitted
Right.
it was a lie.
Fair enough. In light of that, could I ask you whether there has been any improvement from your point of view under the Turnbull government? What is your view generally of the Turnbull government, and do you think that there would be any difference in terms of your consular support under, say, a Shorten Labor government?
When Rudd was Foreign Minister, they once forwarded us a letter that they had received from Sweden, and they also gave me a pen and pencil when I was in prison. That was the sum total of the consular diplomatic support from the Australian government. And since that time, there's been nothing at all. I think to help you understand the craven, sadly craven nature of the Australian government, it's not just about me. Other Australians who have problems in relation to, the United States and United Kingdom also get similar treatment if they're involved in if they're political irritants to those states. So an example I think that really sums that up is the Nobel Peace Prize this year was awarded to ICAN, anti-nuclear group founded in Melbourne, only founded 10 years ago. Some of my friends are involved in that. That's a massive coup for Australia. I believe, I have to double check, but I believe that no Australian organisation has ever won the Nobel Peace Prize, and I think even no Australian has ever won the Nobel Peace Prize. But Malcolm Turnbull could not bring himself to congratulate an Australian organisation for winning the Nobel Peace Prize, because, of course, the United States has nuclear weapons, and Australia is integrated with that system. It's disgraceful. It's pathetic.
All right, who's over in the middle? Yes, right here. Can we put a mic there? And if there are others in the back, just raise your hand so I can see.
Thank you, Julian. You've stated your distrust to journalism, and I was wondering what your opinion is on the novel means that the current U.S. president is using to address the public through direct social media. Is this a method that should be mirrored by other diplomatic politicians to avoid filtered news and press to the public?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. In general, yes, that's an extremely positive thing. The particular way Donald Trump uses it, well, he is a very unusual psychological character, very, very unusual, that he lies like that constantly. Gargantuan lies. So it's not a positive. Every time lies are communicated, it's very rarely a positive. It's a type of intellectual pollution in the library of mankind. On the other hand, he also tells the truth like that in situations where normally people would not tell the truth. They would normally either not say anything or they would conceal in some way. And the result of the second part is very many interesting things being revealed about the structure of US power. And the result of the first part, of course, is all sorts of dangerous distortions which enter into our perception of our perception of reality, or some people's perception of reality.
All right, who else on that? Raised hands? Right here. This?
Julian, I'm a lawyer from India, and there is a much needed focus from WikiLeaks towards Asia, and are we going to see this soon?
Well, you know, so I wouldn't say I know India well, but actually Indians are our second biggest readership outside the United States. And as you might have seen over the years, we've had, a lot of interesting information being released on India. Of course, the Indian Parliament to walk out 8 times. That's a question of expansion, really. When we get such information, we publish it. For example, the Indian ID card, the original, or close to the original plans, well before implementation, we published. But yeah, expanding WikiLeaks. Well, what does an organisation need to expand? It needs to not be distracted by about a dozen different serious legal cases. And it needs to expand its capital. We're doing okay in terms of more than breaking even and slowly expanding. But yeah, if you know of Indians that I guess could form some kind of intellectual nucleus for WikiLeaks in India, I'd be interested to hear that.
Yes, the gentleman up there. In the middle there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right there. I see you. Oh, no, not you. Sorry, I apologize. I want to go further up. He's now standing up. There is, the mic is over there.
Hi, Mr. Assange.
Oh, I apologize. I didn't even see that. Now, I apologize for that.
I'm curious about your claim that you're the boldest publisher and you only publish accurate information. How do you know it's accurate? How do you support that claim? What's your process?
Yeah, so we've become the best forensic analyzers of digital information, at least as far as any organisation is public. I guess an interesting question whether intelligence agencies exceed our capacities. I think probably not. And I don't know, we're good. Some of it's a lot of it's forensics, some of it's gut instinct, some of it's calling people up and trying to find secondary agreement in the truthfulness of the information. Some of it's assessing the economic cost in producing certain material you might benefit, etc. You apportion your analytic resources in proportion to the value of the publication, but also in proportion to how easy it would be to fake the value of faking it in that way, etc. But yeah, so far, 11 million documents published. Now, to be fair, sometimes those are a million at once from the same source. But yeah, we've never misdescribed a document that we've published. We've never misauthenticated anything that we've published. So I think that's a very enviable record. It is actually a bit burdensome. In some ways, I wish we didn't have that record. It's you know, this phrase, the perfect is the enemy of the good. We have perfect. And because we have perfect, and to lose perfect in some sense would be a reputational calamity, we have to reduce volume a little bit to keep perfect.
All right, this gentleman right there in the middle on this. Right, you stand up if you could. Yeah. Oh, there's one up there, and then we'll go here, okay?
Well, Mr. Assange, You've now been holed up inside the embassy for over 5 years. You're in breach of your bail conditions. Were it not for the niceties of diplomatic protocols, the police would have stormed the embassy and arrested you. Do you really have any regard at all with respect for the rule of law? And have you come to terms with the fact that in the absence of you coming out voluntarily, you may end your natural life inside that embassy, holed up in your small room?
Is this a British twat? It sounds like it. Where are you from?
Mr. Assange, you just, with respect, demonstrated you have no regard for the rule of law by your failure to answer that question and by your determination to make such a gratuitous insult.
I'm curious because I have developed a certain understanding of London culture, if you can call it that. Yeah, through my interaction with certain types of people that exist here. So, can you name the publication you're from?
I suspect he's not. I think he's probably just
I'm just a humble lawyer and somebody for whom you have shown by your comments you have no regard at all. Sorry, and I apologise for being British.
Yeah, okay.
All right, let's have...
So you are a member of the state which has been acting unlawfully in relation to me in suppressing my rights, which has been found by the UN and is widely criticised by others, the behaviour of your state. You form part of that state, okay. I don't know exactly how you form part of it, just culturally or whatever, but okay. Yeah, that's an example of the sort of garbage, I guess, that I face in this town.
This gentleman here, yep.
Julian, hi, Nate Walker from California. You hold much of the media in disdain. Are there any, apart from WikiLeaks, are there any media sources or journalists that you generally consider to be trustworthy? And if so, which ones?
C-SPAN. C-SPAN is good. I mean, it's a primary source, a publisher, like we're a primary source publisher. Yeah, no, look, there are fine journalists working across all the major mainstream media outlets. It's just that they are a minority that are concerned about accuracy. It's, and sometimes it kind of beside themselves, you know, when the New York Times or Fox News or Washington Post wants to annihilate one of its enemies, they can spend considerable resources on digging up dirt about them. Is that good or bad? It's a bit of both. You know, those resources are spent. Insofar as the criticism is genuine, it's probably a healthy thing to have this clash of attempted reputational destruction from different parties. I guess Politico Europe has just started. That's very interesting. So Politico comes out of the Graham family, which used to run the Washington Post, which is now run by Amazon. It's been a bit mixed in the US election. It was very biased towards Clinton. I published a number of emails of the Politico journalists lining things up with the Democratic Party in a unprofessional way. But it does also do some good work. And it's opened Politico EU. And that's really produced some fine work, especially for the European context. It's taking some of the good traditions, which are in rapid decay, from the United States print press, and has transported it to Europe. And the traditions in Europe across most of the countries in some ways are quite poor compared to what was the best of US journalism. And over time, of course, any outlet, if it wasn't started by an oligarch or someone connected to the existing establishment in a particular European capital, soon enough its owner its editors, its senior journalists, they start to socially integrate with the very establishment they're meant to be policing. And that becomes a problem. But because Politico.eu is an outside intervention from Americans into Europe, that mostly doesn't exist yet, so it's still fresh. The Intercept does some good things. Ben Greenwald most robustly, but it can do some good things. Some of the German press, they still have this problem. They're too close to their establishments. Can do good stuff. Sometimes the French press.
I know that we could probably continue this for another hour, but we have kind of running out of time. I think one of the greatest aspects, qualities of the IBA is the ability to enter into a dialogue even when the issues are quite controversial and even when the individuals are quite controversial. But I think that's one of our greatest assets. Julian, I want to thank you for being with us. I would like to have the audience to thank you as well for spending time with us on that.